Satisfy me tonight, and I won't divorce you." She shattered his limits. By morning he was begging her to stay. "Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories, where we share our hearts and souls with one another. God bless each and every one of you, my precious friends and faithful supporters. May your day be filled with joy and peace beyond measure. And my beautiful family, today I humbly ask that you write a prayer for me in the comments, straight from the depths of your loving hearts. Your words of blessing mean everything to me. And today's story, oh my dear ones, will truly be a blockbuster that will touch your very soul. Please don't skip this special story. Watch until the end, because I promise you will be moved to tears and laughter. Hit that like button if you feel the love, and let me know you're here, my beautiful family members. Are you present with me today? Let's start with love, as we always do, because love is the foundation of everything beautiful in this world. The crystal chandelier cast diamond-like reflections across Emma's face as she slid the manila envelope across the white tablecloth. Her emerald eyes, once warm with adoration for Alex, now glinted with determination. "Happy anniversary," she said, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening in her chest. Alex's fingers froze around the stem of his champagne glass. 10 years of marriage culminating in this moment at Lumiere, the same restaurant where he'd proposed. The irony wasn't lost on him. What's this? He already knew. The thickness of the envelope, the way she wouldn't meet his eyes directly. "Freedom papers. For both of us." Emma tucked a strand of auburn hair behind her ear, the diamond on her finger catching the light one last time. "I've already signed." Alex didn't touch the envelope. Instead, he studied the woman across from him, familiar yet somehow a stranger now. When had her smile stopped reaching her eyes? When had his attention shifted from memorizing her expressions to memorizing client portfolios? Just like that. 10 years dismissed over Wagyu and champagne. Emma leaned forward, her scent, jasmine and something distinctly her, hitting him with the force of memory. Not just like that. After 3 years of separate bedrooms, after countless cancelled dates, after becoming roommates instead of lovers. The waiter approached. Alex waved him away with a sharp gesture. "I'm giving us one more chance," Emma continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow cut through the ambient restaurant chatter. "One night, tonight. Prove there's something worth saving, or I'm gone by morning." Alex swallowed hard, his throat suddenly desert dry. "And if I refuse this ultimatum?" Emma finally met his gaze fully, and what scared him wasn't the challenge in her eyes, but the flicker of hope she couldn't quite hide. "Then you can sign these papers now, and we'll both stop pretending." Behind her ultimatum hung the unspoken truth. She was fighting for them when he'd stopped fighting years ago. And beneath that, a secret she wasn't yet ready to reveal, one that had pushed her to this desperate gamble. Alex reached for the envelope, but instead grasped her hand. "One night," he agreed, not knowing if he was postponing the inevitable or grabbing a lifeline. "Starting now." He signaled for the check. The waiter arrived with practiced efficiency, sliding the leather folder onto the table with a respectful nod. "Cancel the dessert," Alex said, signing with a flourish that betrayed none of his inner turmoil. Emma's eyebrow arched. "That confident in your persuasive abilities?" "No," he answered, rising and extending his hand to her. "That afraid of wasting a single minute." The honesty surprised them both. Emma hesitated before placing her hand in his, the simple contact sending electricity through fingers that hadn't touched with intent in too long. Outside, the October air nipped at exposed skin. Alex handed the valet his ticket, then turned to Emma. "Your rules, your game. Where do we start?" Emma lifted her chin, moonlight silvering her profile. Home. We start where everything fell apart. The valet pulled up with their sleek black Tesla. Alex opened Emma's door, a courtesy he'd maintained even as other intimacies had fallen away. As she slid past him, her perfume lingered, awakening memories of a time when they couldn't keep their hands off each other. Their house loomed ahead, modern, elegant, and as Alex now realized with striking clarity, utterly devoid of warmth. A showpiece, not a home. When had they started living in a museum of their former happiness? Emma's fingers tightened around her purse. Last chance to sign the papers and skip the drama. Alex parked in the driveway and turned to face her fully. "I've skipped enough where you're concerned." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I accept your challenge, Emma. One night to remember why you fell in love with me. One night to prove I can be the man you deserve." Her breath caught, the first crack in her armor. "You seem awfully confident for someone who's been emotionally AWOL for years." Alex traced his thumb along her jawline, feeling her pulse quicken beneath his touch. "Not confident," he whispered. "Desperate." And in that raw admission lay the first real connection they'd shared in years. Chapter 2. The Time Capsule. Their home looked exactly as it had that morning, immaculate, tasteful, and utterly devoid of passion. Alex loosened his tie as Emma kicked off her heels by the door, the familiar choreography of their evenings almost painfully routine. "So what now?" he asked, shoving hands into pockets. "How exactly does one save a decade-long marriage in a single night?" Emma didn't answer. Instead, she moved toward their bedroom, not the separate guest room she'd been occupying for months, but their original master suite. Alex followed, curiosity overriding his defensive posture. He froze in the doorway. Their bedroom had transformed. Gone was the sleek, modern decor they'd graduated to. Instead, white string lights draped across the ceiling like stars. Scattered rose petals formed a path to their bed, which was now covered with the vintage quilt from their honeymoon cabin in Aspen. "What is this?" His voice cracked despite himself. Emma stood by the bed, vulnerability replacing her restaurant bravado. "I thought we might need to remember who we were before we decide who we'll become." She knelt and pulled something from beneath the bed, a weathered metal box with their initials engraved on top. Alex's breath caught. Their time capsule. The one they'd created after their first anniversary, with explicit instructions not to open until their 10th. "We were supposed to open this tonight at dinner," Emma said quietly, "before I decided on divorce papers instead." Alex approached slowly, as if the box might vanish if he moved too quickly. "I forgot all about this." "I know. So did I until last week when I was packing some things and found it." Emma's fingers traced the engraved E+A on the lid. "I almost opened it alone." "Why didn't you?" Her eyes met his, unguarded for the first time in years. "Because we made a promise." Those 4 words hung between them, heavy with implication. How many other promises had they broken over the years? Small ones at first, then larger ones, until the foundation of their relationship had fractured beyond recognition. "May I?" Alex gestured to the space beside her. Emma nodded, and he lowered himself to the carpet, careful to maintain a respectful distance. The box sat between them, a time machine to their former selves. "Together?" he asked, placing his hand on one side of the lid. Emma hesitated, then placed her hand on the other side. "Together." They lifted the lid in unison. Inside lay carefully preserved treasures from a marriage still flush with promise. A cork from their wedding champagne, concert ticket stubs, a hotel key card, a pressed wildflower from their first hike, a small jar of sand from their honeymoon beach, and letters. 2 sealed envelopes, one with Emma's handwriting, one with Alex's. "We wrote letters to our future selves," Emma whispered, a catch in her voice. Alex nodded, remembering the night they'd sat across from each other at their small kitchen table in their first apartment, writing earnestly about the life they imagined building together. "You first," Emma said, handing him the envelope with his handwriting. Alex hesitated. What if the man who wrote this doesn't exist anymore? Emma's expression softened. "Then meet him again." "I'd like to." With trembling fingers, Alex broke the seal and unfolded pages yellowed with time. His own handwriting, more exuberant than his current corporate signature, stared back at him. "To Alex, the lucky man who has been married to Emma for 10 years, he read aloud, voice unsteady. "If you're reading this, congratulations on not screwing up the best thing that ever happened to you." Emma's surprised laugh encouraged him to continue. "I'm writing this 1 year into the greatest adventure of my life. Today, Emma fell asleep on my chest while we were watching that documentary about penguins she insisted on. I couldn't move for 2 hours. My arm went completely numb, and it was still the best part of my day." Alex paused, remembering that moment with startling clarity. "By now, you've probably built the A-frame cabin in Colorado we've been designing. Emma's probably still taking photos of everything, filling albums with moments you'd otherwise forget. You've traveled to at least 15 countries together. Maybe you've started the family you talk about, or maybe you're still selfish with your time together." Alex swallowed hard. No cabin, no 15 countries, just business trips and separate vacations these past few years. No family, no photos recently. Emma had stopped documenting their lives. "Whatever you've done, wherever you are, I have just one question. Do you still watch her when she doesn't know you're looking? Do you still catch your breath when she laughs? Does your heart still race when she walks into a room?" His voice broke. He couldn't continue, because the answer was no. Somewhere along the way, he'd stopped seeing her. Emma gently took the letter, her fingers brushing his. She continued reading where he'd left off. "If not, fix it, you idiot. Nothing, not your job, not money, not success, is worth losing the way she looks at you, the way she believes in you, the way she loves you. I don't know what challenges you've faced or will face, but I know this. Choose her. Every time, choose her." Emma's voice faltered on the last sentence. Silence filled the space between them, broken only by the sound of their uneven breathing. "Your turn," Alex finally said, nodding toward her unopened letter. Emma stared at her envelope for a long moment before breaking the seal with delicate precision. She unfolded her letter, took a deep breath, and began. "Dear future Emma, I'm writing this while watching Alex sleep. He has no idea how ridiculously handsome he is when he's completely relaxed, his guard down, his face peaceful. I hope you still steal these moments to just watch him exist." Emma paused, a flush creeping up her neck. She looked up to find Alex watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. 10 years with this man. I can hardly imagine it, yet I can't imagine anything else. By now, you've weathered storms together. You've fought and made up. You've built something beautiful. Emma's voice grew steadier as she continued. "Remember how he brings you coffee in bed every Sunday? How he knows exactly when to argue with you and when to just hold you. How he calls your mother on her birthday, even though she talks his ear off for an hour. Don't take these things for granted. These are the threads that weave a life together." Alex's throat tightened. He'd stopped those Sunday coffees 3 years ago when work became too demanding. Stopped engaging in their heated debates about politics, literature, everything. Stopped calling her mother altogether. If you've forgotten how to see the extraordinary man behind the ordinary moments, look harder. If the passion has faded, rekindle it. If you've grown apart, grow together again. Marriage isn't a destination, it's a journey you choose every single day. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she turned the page. "P.S. If he's still doing that thing where he pretends he doesn't dance but then twirls you in the kitchen when your song comes on, you've done something right. She folded the letter carefully, not meeting Alex's eyes. We were so young, she whispered. We were naive, Alex agreed softly. No, Emma shook her head. We were right. We just forgot. Alex reached into the box and pulled out a small USB drive he hadn't noticed before. What's this? Emma took it, recognition dawning. Our playlist. Every song that mattered to us that first year. Suddenly, Alex knew exactly what he needed to do. He stood, extending his hand to her. Dance with me. Emma looked up, surprise evident. Now? Now, before we overthink this, before we remember all the reasons we stopped. After a moment's hesitation, Emma placed her hand in his and allowed him to pull her to her feet. Alex plugged the USB into the small speaker on their dresser. The opening notes of their wedding song filled the room, not the official first dance song they'd carefully choreographed, but the one that had played later when they'd snuck away from the reception for a moment alone. Without a word, Alex pulled Emma into his arms, one hand at the small of her back, the other entwined with hers. They began to move, awkwardly at first, then with increasing fluidity as muscle memory took over. I've missed this, Alex admitted, his lips close to her ear. I've missed you. Emma didn't respond, but she moved closer, resting her head against his chest the way she used to. Alex closed his eyes, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling the shape of her against him. Familiar, yet somehow new again. The song ended, transitioning to another they'd once loved. Neither made a move to separate. Instead, they continued swaying together in the softly lit room, surrounded by artifacts of a love they'd once cherished above all else. We still have time, Alex whispered against her hair. Don't we? Emma pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. In that moment, beneath the string lights, with echoes of their past selves surrounding them, the armor she'd worn to dinner cracked further. That depends, she said softly, on what we do with the hours before sunrise. Chapter 3. The Confession. The music shifted to something with a stronger beat, breaking the spell of their slow dance. Emma stepped back, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, a nervous gesture Alex had always found endearing. I should change, she said, glancing down at her elegant black dress. This isn't exactly comfortable for a night of whatever this is. Alex nodded, loosening his tie further. I'll make us drinks. Whiskey, Emma called after him as he turned to leave. Not wine. Wine feels too much like negotiation, he finished for her. Their eyes met in shared recognition of the countless business dinners where wine had flowed as freely as shallow conversation. In the kitchen, Alex selected the 18-year-old Macallan they'd been saving for a special occasion. He poured 2 generous measures into crystal tumblers, added a single ice cube to Emma's, the way she preferred, and returned to find her in silk pajamas, face scrubbed clean of makeup. He handed her the whiskey, their fingers brushing, a small contact that felt monumental in its deliberateness. Your turn, she said, nodding toward his suit. When he returned in more comfortable clothes, Emma had moved to their bedroom balcony. She stood at the railing, staring at the city lights below. Remember when we used to spend whole evenings out here, just talking? Alex joined her, careful to maintain a respectful distance, until the neighbors complained about our laughing at 2 in the morning. Mrs. Abernathy with her broomstick on the ceiling, Emma reminisced, a genuine smile warming her features. She moved out years ago, Alex realized aloud. I don't even know who lives below us now. Emma turned to face him. That's the problem, isn't it? We stopped noticing, stopped caring about the details. Alex took a deliberate sip of whiskey, using the burn to steady himself. I never stopped caring about you, Emma. Didn't you? Her voice held no accusation, only genuine curiosity. Because from where I stand, your actions tell a different story." "My actions," Alex acknowledged quietly, "not my feelings." Is there really a difference when it comes to marriage? The question demanded honesty he wasn't sure he could provide, not without revealing everything. Emma sensed his hesitation. "This was your opportunity to prove me wrong, Alex. To convince me we have something worth fighting for." "We do," he said, setting his glass down decisively. "And I can prove it. But I need to show you something first." "Show me what?" "Get dressed. Something casual. We need to take a drive." 15 minutes later, they were in his car, Emma visibly confused as Alex drove them out of the city. "Are you planning to murder me and dispose of my body rather than pay alimony?" she quipped, breaking the silence. Alex laughed despite the tension. "If I were planning your murder, I wouldn't have waited for divorce papers." They drove for 30 minutes, leaving the city behind. Finally, Alex turned onto a private road, partially hidden by trees. "Seriously, where are we going?" Emma asked, unease creeping into her voice. The road ended at a clearing overlooking the valley. City lights twinkled in the distance like earthbound stars, but it wasn't the view that caused Emma's sharp intake of breath. It was the structure taking shape before them. A modern A-frame cabin, its wooden skeleton illuminated by construction lights. "What is this?" Emma whispered, though her expression suggested she already knew. Alex killed the engine. "The reason I've been working 80-hour weeks, the reason I've been distant, the reason I've had secret phone calls and unexplained absences." Emma stepped out of the car in a daze, approaching the half-built structure. Alex followed, watching her reaction carefully. "You're building our cabin," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "The one from the letter, the one we designed that first year." Alex came to stand beside her. "I hired Santiago Rivera to design it." Emma's head snapped toward him in shock. "The Santiago Rivera, the architect who won't even take meetings unless your net worth is in the billions." "The same," Alex confirmed. "Turns out he's a sucker for a good love story. I showed him our original sketches, the ones you drew on napkins at that ski lodge. He agreed to take the project if I promised never to change a single element you'd designed." Emma turned to face him, moonlight silvering the tears in her eyes. "So all those late nights, site meetings, conference calls with Santiago, material selections." Alex stepped closer. "The trip to Milan that I couldn't explain? Sourcing the exact marble you wanted for the kitchen?" "I thought," Emma began, then stopped. "That I was having an affair," Alex finished for her. "I know. I saw the search history on your laptop. Signs your husband is cheating. Private investigators near me." Emma looked away, embarrassed. "You were so secretive, so distant. What was I supposed to think?" "You were supposed to trust me," Alex said softly. "But I didn't give you much reason to, did I?" He took her hand, leading her through the front doorway into what would eventually be their great room. The roof was incomplete, leaving the space open to the star-filled sky above. "This is where the fireplace will go," he explained, pointing, "with the reading nook you wanted built into the wall beside it." Emma moved through the space, touching supports and beams as if to convince herself they were real. "You remembered everything." "I never forgot, Emma. I just got distracted by building a life I thought you deserved. The promotions, the bigger house, the investment portfolio." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "I was so focused on providing the life we talked about that I forgot to actually live it with you." Emma stopped her exploration, turning to face him fully. "Why didn't you tell me about this place?" "Because you get this look when you're truly surprised by something you love," Alex said, stepping closer. "Your eyes widen first, then your lips part just slightly, and there's this moment, this perfect moment, where you're speechless with joy." I wanted that moment on our anniversary." Emma's expression now was exactly as he'd described, wonder mixed with dawning comprehension. "Instead, I got divorce papers," he continued quietly, "and I realized I'd been building the wrong future, focusing on the structure of our lives instead of the heart of our relationship." He reached for her hand again, encouraged when she didn't pull away. "I'm not asking you to stay because of this cabin, Emma. I'm showing you this place because it's proof that I never stopped loving you, never stopped dreaming of our future. I just stopped showing you that love in ways that mattered." Emma's fingers tightened around his. "You could have told me." "I should have," he agreed. "But tonight isn't about what I should have done. It's about what I'm going to do if you give me another chance." The night breeze whispered through the unfinished walls. Above them, stars glittered in the vast expanse of sky, visible through the missing roof. In this half-built dream, their future hung in perfect, precarious balance. "I can't promise you that cabin from our letters," Alex said softly, "but I can promise to build whatever future you want, together. No more working in secret. No more assuming I know what you need without asking." Emma looked up at him, moonlight catching the tears tracking silently down her cheeks. "You weren't the only one keeping secrets," she whispered. Chapter 4. The Storm. They drove back toward the city in charged silence, Emma's cryptic confession hanging between them like smoke. Alex gripped the steering wheel, resisting the urge to demand elaboration. She would tell him when ready, if she decided he deserved to know at all. Dark clouds had gathered during their time at the cabin site, obscuring the stars that had witnessed their moment of fragile connection. The first fat raindrops splattered against the windshield as they entered the city limits. "Looks like we're in for a downpour," Alex observed, breaking the silence. Emma nodded, her profile illuminated by passing streetlights. The forecast mentioned a storm system moving through overnight. Small talk. After 10 years of marriage and facing imminent divorce, they'd resorted to discussing the weather. The absurdity wasn't lost on either of them. "About what I said back there," Emma began. A brilliant flash of lightning cut her off, followed immediately by a crash of thunder that seemed to shake the very frame of the car. The rain intensified in an instant, hammering against the roof and reducing visibility to mere feet. "Jesus," Alex muttered, slowing the car to a crawl. "This isn't just a storm, it's biblical." Emma leaned forward, peering through the deluge. "Maybe we should pull over and wait it out." Another flash-boom combination decided for them as the traffic lights ahead went dark. Within seconds, the streetlights followed. "Power outage," Alex said unnecessarily. "We're only 10 minutes from home. I think we can make it if we go slow." Emma nodded, her earlier tension momentarily forgotten in the face of more immediate concerns. They navigated the rain-slicked streets carefully, witnessing the progressive darkening of the city as the blackout spread. By the time they reached their building, the entire neighborhood had gone dark. The underground parking garage was eerily silent, emergency lights casting weak yellow pools at regular intervals. Their footsteps echoed as they made their way to the private elevator that served their penthouse. Alex pressed the call button. Nothing happened. "Backup generators should have kicked in," he frowned, pressing it again. Emma sighed. "Stairs it is. 15 flights in heels I've already kicked off once tonight. Perfect." Despite everything, Alex smiled. "I could carry you." Emma's eyebrow arched. "Just because I kissed you at the cabin doesn't mean I'm swooning into your arms, Hemsworth." "You didn't kiss me at the cabin," Alex corrected, holding open the stairwell door. "You almost told me something important, then clammed up the entire drive home." Emma started up the stairs, her light jacket pulled tight against the chill of the concrete stairwell. Maybe the moment passed. "Or maybe you're still deciding if I deserve your trust." She glanced back at him, surprise registering at his insight. "When did you get so perceptive?" "I've always been perceptive," Alex countered, following her. "I just stopped paying attention to the right things." By the 8th floor, they were both breathing heavily. By the 12th, conversation had ceased entirely in favor of conservation of oxygen. When they finally reached their floor, Emma leaned against the wall, catching her breath. "Remind me," she panted, "to cancel my gym membership. Divorce apparently comes with its own cardio program." Alex fished out his keys, grimacing at her casual reference to their separation. 1 step forward, 2 steps back. At least the door locks are manual. Inside, their apartment was preternaturally quiet. No hum of electronics, no ambient sounds from the climate control system, just the thunderous rain against the windows and their own breathing. "I'll find candles," Emma offered, using her phone's flashlight to navigate toward the kitchen. Alex headed for the utility closet, where they kept emergency supplies. He returned with a battery-powered lantern that cast a soft glow across the living space. Emma emerged from the kitchen with a collection of scented candles on a tray. "All I could find," she explained. "I've been meaning to restock the emergency kit." "We've both been meaning to do a lot of things," Alex replied, helping her place and light the candles around the room. Gradually, their home transformed. Shadows danced across walls as lightning periodically illuminated the room in harsh white flashes. The artificial coolness of their modern decor softened in the warm candlelight, revealing hints of the cozy space it had once been. "It's beautiful," Emma murmured, removing her damp jacket. "In a post-apocalyptic sort of way." Alex found himself watching her, illuminated by candlelight, more breathtaking than she'd been in their time capsule photos. He'd been a fool to stop looking, to stop seeing. "I'll make a fire," he offered, moving toward the sleek gas fireplace. "It's electric," Emma reminded him. "No power, remember?" Alex paused, chagrined. Right, of course. Another sign of how they'd prioritized aesthetics over function, convenience over connection. Their original apartment had featured a wood-burning fireplace they'd used constantly during winters. "We could build a fire in the bathtub," he suggested, only half joking. To his surprise, Emma laughed, a genuine sound he hadn't heard in too long. "And set off the sprinkler system? I'm trying to divorce you, not murder you for the insurance money." The casual mention of divorce again. Alex winced. Emma noticed. "Too soon for gallows humor?" "It's not the timing," Alex admitted, sinking onto the sofa. "It's hearing you say it so easily, like you've already moved on in your mind." Emma remained standing, arms crossed protectively over her chest. "I had to get comfortable with the idea before I could take action. I've been practicing saying it for months." The confession landed like a blow. "Months," he repeated. "While I was building our dream cabin, you were rehearsing our ending. While you were disappearing into secret projects and late nights, I was trying to figure out why my husband couldn't stand to be around me anymore," Emma corrected, heat entering her voice. "Don't make me the villain for protecting myself." "I'm not," Alex began, then stopped, reining in his defensiveness. "You're right. I'm sorry." Emma blinked, clearly not expecting the concession. Silence stretched between them, broken only by another dramatic thunderclap. "We should change into dry clothes," she finally suggested. Alex nodded. "I'll take the guest bathroom." Another crack of lightning illuminated Emma's face, the flash revealing a fleeting expression of disappointment. Or was he imagining what he wanted to see? They moved through their familiar routines in separate spaces, the storm raging outside while a different kind of turbulence churned within. When Alex emerged in dry clothes, he found Emma sitting cross-legged on the floor near the candles, her damp hair piled atop her head, wearing leggings and an oversized sweater he recognized as his own. She'd kept it. Despite everything, she'd kept his old university sweater. Better? He asked, his voice rougher than intended. Emma nodded, gesturing to the space across from her. I thought we might need this. Between them sat an unopened bottle of tequila and 2 shot glasses, the same brand they'd shared on their first date when Emma had declared she could outdrink him. She had. Truth or consequences? Alex recognized the setup immediately. Their old game, the one they played whenever they needed to break through barriers between them. The storm took away all our distractions, Emma explained, uncapping the bottle. No phones, no Netflix, no work emails, just us, facing each other without filters. Alex lowered himself to sit opposite her, their knees almost touching. What are the stakes? Emma poured 2 shots with steady hands. Complete honesty, answer truthfully or drink. I remember the rules, Alex said, picking up his glass. Ladies first. Emma's eyes glinted in the candlelight. Why did you really stop sleeping in our bed? No easing in, no warm-up questions, straight for the jugular. Alex set down his shot untouched. Because I couldn't bear being that close to you and not touching you. The confession hung between them as another flash of lightning illuminated their faces, the thunder following almost immediately, directly overhead. Like the storm, they had reached the heart of their own turbulence. And like the storm, there was no path forward except through. Chapter 5. The dance, the stakes, Emma repeated, sliding his shot across the space between them. Let's say complete honesty. Answer truthfully or drink. I remember the rules, Alex said, picking up his glass. Ladies first. Emma's eyes glinted in the candlelight. Why did you really stop sleeping in our bed? No easing in, no warm-up questions, straight for the jugular. Alex set down his shot untouched. Because I couldn't bear being that close to you and not touching you. Emma blinked, surprise evident. What? 3 years ago, after that charity gala. You were upset because I spent the whole night networking instead of being your date. We argued. You said, why did you even bring me if you were going to ignore me all night? I remember, Emma said quietly. That night, I reached for you, and you turned away. Alex swallowed hard. And it occurred to me that I'd become the thing I never wanted to be, the husband who takes his wife for granted. I disgusted myself. So you punished yourself by moving to the guest room. Emma's brow furrowed. That makes no sense, Alex. It wasn't punishment. It was self-preservation. He ran a hand through his hair. Every night, lying next to you, wanting you but knowing I hadn't earned the right to touch you. It was torture. Emma stared at him, candlelight flickering across her features. You never said, what was I supposed to say? Hey, I know I've been a terrible husband, but I still want to have sex with you. Alex shook his head. I figured you were relieved I wasn't bothering you anymore. Bothering me? Emma repeated incredulously. You thought making love to your wife was bothering her? Alex looked away. My turn. Why didn't you ever ask me to come back? Emma's fingers tightened around her shot glass, but she didn't drink. Pride at first, then fear. Fear of what? That you'd say no. That you'd confirm what I suspected. That you didn't want me anymore. Her voice dropped to a whisper. That you were staying out of obligation, not desire. Lightning flashed, briefly illuminating her face, vulnerable in a way she'd never allowed at their couples' therapy sessions. I've never stopped wanting you, Emma. The words escaped before Alex could filter them. Not for a single day. The confession hung between them, charged as the air before lightning strikes. Emma's gaze dropped to his lips, then back to his eyes. My turn, she said, voice unsteady. At the cabin, when we almost kissed, why did you pull back? Alex exhaled slowly. Because I wanted to be sure it wouldn't be goodbye. Another crack of thunder shook the windows. The storm outside mirrored the intensity building between them. Your turn, Emma prompted. Alex studied her face in the flickering light. What were you going to tell me at the cabin? What secret were you keeping? Emma's hand trembled slightly as she lifted her shot glass. For a moment he thought she would drink, choose alcohol over truth. Instead, she set it down untouched. I was offered partnership at Lawson and Reed. Alex's brow furrowed in confusion. The firm in Paris? Richard Lawson's firm? Emma nodded. Richard reached out personally, said they need someone to head their international arbitration division. Richard, Alex repeated, a cold weight settling in his stomach. Your ex-boyfriend, Richard? The one who... Yes, that Richard. Emma held his gaze steadily. He heard about the Petrova case I won last year. Alex processed this information, pieces clicking into place. The international calls she'd been taking privately, the French language refresher course on her browser history he'd glimpsed. He'd assumed these were signs of her planning a post-divorce life, not a completely different betrayal. You're considering it? Not a question. I was, Emma corrected. It's an incredible opportunity. In Paris, Alex stated flatly, with Richard. The location and Richard's involvement are incidental to the position. Emma's lawyer voice, precise, controlled. Bullshit. Alex rarely swore at her. Nothing about Richard Lawson is ever incidental. He's been trying to get you back since the day we got engaged. Emma's eyes flashed. This is exactly why I didn't tell you. You always reduce my professional opportunities to some soap opera about men fighting over me. Is he still married? Alex demanded. That's not relevant to the... Is he still married? Each word precise, controlled. Emma sighed. He's separated, filing for divorce. Alex barked a humorless laugh. Convenient timing. My turn, Emma cut in, clearly eager to change subjects. Why did you stop bringing me coffee on Sundays? The abrupt shift threw him. What? In my letter, I mentioned how you brought me coffee in bed every Sunday. You stopped. Why? Alex reached for his shot, then changed his mind. If she could face uncomfortable truths, so could he. Because you stopped being there, he said quietly. That first Sunday after you presented at the International Law Forum, I brought your coffee as usual, but you'd already left for the office. The next Sunday, same thing. By the third Sunday, I figured you'd rather have the extra work hours than lazy morning rituals with me. Emma's expression softened. I thought you stopped because you didn't want to maintain the tradition. I thought you were sending me a message that your career had become more important than our rituals. I was trying to make partner, Emma explained. Those weekend hours were expected, not chosen. You never said that. Alex shook his head. All you had to do was say, Alex, I have to work Sundays for a while, but I miss our coffee time. I would have understood. All you had to do was ask why I was working instead of assuming I was choosing work over you, Emma countered. They stared at each other, the revelation of their mutual misinterpretations hanging between them. We stopped talking, Emma said softly. Really talking. We stopped listening, Alex corrected, even when we did talk. Another flash of lightning illuminated the room, followed by a boom of thunder directly overhead. The candles flickered, and one went out completely. My turn, Alex said, leaning forward to relight the extinguished candle. Are you still attracted to me? Emma's eyes widened. That's what you want to know? With everything at stake? It seems fundamental, Alex replied. You can be committed to someone without still wanting them. You can love someone without desiring them. Emma held his gaze for a long moment, then deliberately raised her shot glass and drained its contents. Alex felt the rejection like a physical blow, his chest tightening painfully. I couldn't answer, Emma explained, setting down her empty glass, because it's not a simple yes or no. And I refuse to reduce 3 years of physical estrangement to something so binary. Fair enough, Alex managed, reaching for his own shot. Don't, Emma said, placing her hand over his to stop him. Let me finish. The touch, her first deliberate initiation of contact, sent electricity through him. Alex went still, hyper-aware of her warm fingers over his. "There were days I couldn't stand the sight of you," Emma admitted. "Days when looking at you only reminded me of everything we'd lost. And there were nights I lay awake, aching for you, hating that you were just down the hall, but completely unreachable." Her fingers tightened over his. "And then there were moments, like tonight at the cabin, when I looked at you and felt exactly what I felt the first time I saw you in that dive bar in law school. Like I couldn't breathe, like everything else disappeared." Alex turned his hand beneath hers, interlacing their fingers. "And now? Tonight?" Thunder rumbled again, softer this time, the storm beginning to move past them. Emma's free hand reached for her phone. "What we need," she said, evading his question, "is music." She scrolled briefly, then selected something. The opening notes of a familiar song filled the room, their song, but not the wedding version from earlier. The original track they'd been listening to the first time they danced in his cramped law school apartment. Emma stood, tugging him to his feet. "Dance with me, Emma." "Dance with me, Alex. Now, before we overthink this. Before we remember all the reasons we stopped." His own words from earlier, redirected back at him. Alex couldn't help but smile as he allowed her to pull him to an open space between the sofas. Unlike their earlier slow dance in the bedroom, Emma moved into his arms with purpose, her body pressing against his with deliberate intent. One hand slid up his chest to rest at the nape of his neck, fingers threading through his hair. The other grasped his hand, bringing it to rest at the small of her back. Alex's breath caught as she molded herself against him, familiar curves fitting perfectly against him. They began to move, and this time there was nothing awkward about it. Their bodies remembered what their minds had tried to forget, how perfectly they complemented each other, how naturally they moved together. "I've answered your question," Emma murmured, her lips close to his ear. "Are you satisfied with my response?" Alex's hand tightened at her waist. "I'm not sure I fully understood it." Emma pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. In the candlelight, her expression was more open than he'd seen in years. "Then let me clarify," she whispered, rising on tiptoes to press her lips to his. The kiss began hesitantly, a question, an offering. When Alex responded, gathering her closer, Emma made a small sound in the back of her throat that sent heat coursing through him. The kiss deepened, years of restraint giving way to hunger neither had fully acknowledged until this moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Emma rested her forehead against his chest. "Does that answer your question?" she asked, voice unsteady. Alex tilted her chin up, searching her eyes. "Why now?" "Because the storm took away all our distractions." Emma echoed her earlier words. No pretenses, no hiding behind work or separate rooms or polite distance. Her fingers traced the line of his jaw, a touch so tender it made his heart ache. "And because for the first time in years," she continued softly, "I'm seeing the man I fell in love with instead of the stranger he became." Alex turned his face to press a kiss to her palm. "I'm still here, Emma. I've always been here." "Then stay," she whispered, rising again to brush her lips against his. "Stay with me tonight." The double meaning wasn't lost on him. Stay the night. Stay in our marriage. Stay in our life. As the storm continued to recede outside their windows, Alex pulled Emma closer, his answer clear in every line of his body as they continued to dance in the candlelight, finding their way back to each other, one step at a time. Chapter 6. The Rival. The storm had passed, leaving behind a gentle rainfall that tapped against the windows. Candles still flickered throughout the apartment, though many had burned low. Emma and Alex had moved to the plush rug in front of where the fireplace would be roaring if the power hadn't failed. They sat close, Shoulders touching, the tequila bottle between them significantly depleted. "Truth or consequences?" Alex asked, voice low in the quiet room. Emma laughed softly. "Haven't we exposed enough of our souls for one night?" "Not even close." Alex traced idle patterns on her palm with his fingertip. "We have years of silence to make up for." The electricity between them had shifted from the heated passion of their earlier dance to something quieter but no less intense, a reconnection happening, one revealed truth at a time. "Fine," Emma conceded. "One more question each." Alex nodded, considering carefully. "The partnership offer from Richard. When did he approach you?" Emma's expression shifted subtly. 3 months ago, after the Petrova verdict made international news." 3 months, Alex repeated. "Around the time you started meeting with divorce attorneys." It wasn't a question, but Emma answered anyway. "Yes." Was it his idea? The divorce. The bitterness in his voice surprised even him. Emma pulled her hand away. "That's 2 questions." Emma, "No, it wasn't his idea," she interrupted, eyes flashing. "Contrary to what you seem to believe, I'm capable of making my own decisions without male guidance." "That's not what I meant." "Isn't it?" Emma stood, moving to the window. Rain streaked the glass, distorting the city lights that had begun to reappear as power returned to some neighborhoods. "You've always seen Richard as some puppet master manipulating me. Even 10 years later, you can't accept that I chose you, not him." Alex joined her at the window, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "He was calling you the week before our wedding, sending you law journals with personal notes, acting like your mentor when he clearly wanted more." "Because he believed in my potential as a lawyer," Emma countered, "something you used to do before you decided my career was a threat to your ego." The accusation landed like a slap. "That's not fair." "Isn't it?" Emma turned to face him. "When I made junior partner, you didn't even come to the ceremony. When I won Petrova, you sent flowers instead of attending the verdict. And when Richard, yes, Richard, offers me the opportunity of a lifetime, your first concern isn't what it means for my career, but whether he has ulterior motives. Because he always has ulterior motives where you're concerned." Alex's control slipped. "And because I've watched him circle you for years, waiting for me to screw up enough that you'd run back to him." Emma shook her head in disbelief. "You think that's what this is? Me running back to an ex from law school?" "I think," Alex said carefully, "that Richard Lawson has spent 10 years regretting that he let you get away, and I think he saw our marriage fracturing and positioned himself perfectly to catch you when you fell." Emma stared at him, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "You want the truth? Richard did mention our connection as part of his pitch. He said we always worked well together, that our minds complemented each other's. He said he's missed our partnership." Each word drove the knife deeper. Alex turned away, unable to watch her reminisce about her connection with Richard. "But," Emma continued, her voice softening, "he also said something else. He said he knows I never loved him the way I loved you, that even when we were together, he could tell my heart wasn't fully engaged, and he was right." Alex turned back, finding her closer than before. "Richard isn't offering me a second chance at romance, Alex. He's offering me the legal career I've worked toward my entire life, international arbitration at the highest level, cases that change global policy." "In Paris," Alex said quietly, 6,000 miles away from here, from me." "Yes," Emma acknowledged. "That's the other reason I decided on divorce, because it seemed kinder than asking you to uproot your entire life for my career when we barely even speak anymore." The truth of her situation crashed over him. She hadn't been planning to leave him for Richard. She'd been planning to leave him to pursue her dreams, dreams he'd stopped supporting years ago. "Did you accept the offer?" he asked, dreading the answer. "I have until the end of next week to decide," Emma replied. "The partnership officially begins in January. 3 months from now, a lifetime and no time at all." "My turn," she said softly. "If I took this position, if I moved to Paris, what would you do?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibilities. Alex could feel the trajectory of their future balancing on his answer. 10 hours ago, he would have reacted with anger, with accusations, with ultimatums of his own. But standing here in the soft darkness, having glimpsed what they still could be together, he found clarity instead. "I'd help you pack," he said simply. Emma's eyes widened in surprise. "Then I'd call Santiago and tell him to adapt the cabin plans so we could rent it out while we're abroad," Alex continued. "I'd reach out to my firm's international division about transfer possibilities, or maybe look into teaching positions at French universities, and I'd start intensive French lessons because my 3 semesters in college won't get me very far." Emma stared at him, speechless. "What?" Alex asked, a small smile playing at his lips. "Did you think I'd throw a tantrum and refuse to consider it?" "Honestly, yes." Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. "That's exactly what I expected." "The old me would have," Alex acknowledged. "The me who was so focused on my own path that I couldn't see I was leaving you behind. But Emma, if tonight has shown me anything, it's that I don't want a life that doesn't include you." He stepped closer, emboldened when she didn't retreat. "If Paris is where your dreams are taking you, then Paris is where I need to be." He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "Though I reserve the right to complain about French coffee and make terrible puns about the Eiffel Tower." A tear slipped down Emma's cheek. "You would really leave everything? Your position at the firm, the cabin project, our life here?" "None of those things matter without you," Alex said simply. "And I think that's been the problem all along. I've been treating our relationship like it's one aspect of my life instead of the foundation of everything." He brushed the tear from her cheek with his thumb. "I lost sight of us, Emma. I forgot that we're a team, that your dreams are as important as mine, that your career deserves my support, not my competition." More tears followed the first. Alex gathered her gently into his arms, relieved when she came willingly, her head finding its familiar place against his chest. "Why couldn't you have said this 3 months ago?" she whispered against his shirt. "Before I paid a divorce attorney $5,000? Alex laughed softly, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Because I needed to see those divorce papers to realize what I was about to lose, and because you needed to give me that ultimatum to break through my stubborn pride." Emma pulled back just enough to look up at him. "So what happens now?" "Now," Alex said, brushing his lips lightly against hers, "we keep talking. We figure out what Paris looks like for both of us. Or we figure out what staying here looks like if that's what you decide. But we do it together, as partners, not adversaries." Emma's hands slid up to frame his face. "And if I decide to take the Paris position? Then I'll learn to love croissants and perfect my French accent," Alex promised. "And I'll be ridiculously proud, watching you revolutionize international law from your corner office with a view of the Seine." Before Emma could respond, the apartment suddenly blazed with light as the power returned. They both blinked in the sudden brightness, the spell of candlelight intimacy broken. Alex reached for the nearest switch, dimming the lights back to a soft glow. "Better?" Emma nodded, but her expression had changed, a shadow crossing her features. "What is it?" Alex asked, sensing her withdrawal. "It's just—" Emma hesitated. "This all feels too easy now. One night of honesty and suddenly you're willing to move to Paris. Ready to support a career opportunity you didn't even know existed yesterday." What happens when real life crashes back in tomorrow morning? It was a fair question. One night couldn't erase years of neglect and misunderstanding. I'm not saying it will be easy, Alex acknowledged. We have a lot of work to do, a lot of patterns to break. But isn't that better than signing those papers without even trying? Emma didn't answer immediately. Instead, she moved to retrieve her phone from the coffee table. I need to show you something, she said, scrolling through her emails. Before we make any decisions about Paris or divorce or second chances. She handed him the phone, open to an email with an attached medical report. Alex's confusion turned to concern as he began to read, then to understanding as the implications became clear. This is why I've been pulling away, Emma said quietly. This is the other secret I've been keeping. Chapter 7. The Challenge. Alex stared at the medical report on Emma's phone, the clinical language swimming before his eyes. Words jumped out at him. Diminished ovarian reserve, advanced maternal age considerations, significantly reduced fertility. How long have you known? He asked, his voice barely audible. 6 months. Emma hugged herself, as if suddenly cold despite the mild temperature of the apartment. I went in for a routine checkup, mentioned we'd once talked about having children, and the doctor suggested testing given my age. Alex looked up from the phone, finding Emma's eyes glistening with unshed tears. Why didn't you tell me? Because we were barely speaking, she replied. Because you seemed relieved to be living separate lives. Because I didn't want your pity, or worse, your obligation. Alex set the phone down carefully. Do you still want children? The question hung between them, heavier than all the others they'd faced that night. I don't know, Emma admitted. For years, I told myself we were waiting for the right time, after making partner, after your promotion, after the market stabilized. Then suddenly the choice was potentially being taken away, and I realized I'd never actually decided if motherhood was part of the life I wanted. She moved to the sofa, sinking down as if her legs could no longer support her. What I do know is that I couldn't bear you staying with me out of some misplaced sense of duty, or because you were afraid I'd be alone with no family if we divorced. Alex joined her, maintaining a small distance between them. So instead, you decided to leave me before I could leave you. It sounds childish when you put it that way, Emma said with a hollow laugh. It sounds human, Alex corrected gently. Self-protective, understandable. He reached for her hand, relieved when she didn't pull away. But Emma, you didn't give me the chance to react. You made decisions based on what you thought I would feel, not what I actually felt. And what do you actually feel? She asked, vulnerable in a way that made his chest ache. Alex considered the question carefully, knowing his answer mattered more than perhaps any other he'd given that night. Sad, he said finally, sad that you've been carrying this alone. Sad that we've drifted so far apart that you couldn't share something so important. His thumb traced circles on her palm. But not sad about the diagnosis itself. Emma, we never seriously discussed having children. It was always this abstract future possibility. If you're grieving that potential loss, I'll grieve with you. But don't assume I'm disappointed or that I'd value you less. Emma studied his face, searching for insincerity. You've never wanted kids? I've never not wanted them, Alex clarified. But they've never been a requirement for my happiness. You, on the other hand, his voice softened. You've always been essential. A single tear escaped, tracking down Emma's cheek. Even now? After everything? Especially now? Alex brushed the tear away. Tonight has reminded me of what we were, what we are when we actually see each other. I don't want to lose that again. Emma's phone chimed with a text notification. She glanced at it, then set it aside with a small frown. "Richard," she explained, catching Alex's questioning look. "Checking if I've made my decision about Paris." The name sent a familiar surge of jealousy through Alex, but he tamped it down. "You should respond." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Now?" "No time like the present for honesty, right?" He kept his tone light, though his heart hammered in his chest. "Tell him where things stand." Emma studied him for a moment, then picked up her phone. "What exactly should I tell him?" "The truth," Alex said simply. "That you haven't decided yet." She typed briefly, then set the phone aside. "Done, though he'll probably call tomorrow looking for more details." "Let him," Alex said with newfound confidence. "I'm not threatened by Richard Lawson." Emma's lips quirked upward. "Since when?" "Since I realized I've been viewing him as a rival when the real threat to our marriage was my own complacency." He shifted closer to her on the sofa. "I forgot how to fight for us, Emma. I won't make that mistake again." The assertiveness in his tone sparked something in Emma's eyes, a flash of the attraction she'd denied earlier. "Prove it," she challenged softly. "How?" Emma stood, extending her hand to him. "Come with me." Intrigued, Alex followed her to their bedroom. The transformation from earlier remained. String lights casting a soft glow, rose petals now slightly wilted but still fragrant on the bed. Emma reached for the hem of his t-shirt, her intent clear in her darkened eyes. "Show me we still work together. Show me we can still communicate without words." Alex caught her wrists gently. "Emma, are you sure?" "I don't want you to regret this in the morning." "I've spent 3 years regretting what we haven't done," she whispered. "I'm tired of regret." She freed her hands from his grasp, reaching up to frame his face. "This isn't a solution to our problems. It's not even a beginning. But tonight is all we promised each other, and I want to remember what it feels like to be us again, completely us." The vulnerability in her admission broke the last of Alex's hesitation. He drew her closer, his kiss conveying what words couldn't: longing, regret, hope, desire. Emma responded with equal fervor, her body pressing against his with unmistakable intent. As clothing fell away and they rediscovered each other with tentative touches that grew increasingly confident, Alex marveled at how familiar yet new this felt. Emma's body had changed subtly over the years, more defined in some places, softer in others. He explored each difference reverently, recommitting her to memory. "Tell me what you want," he murmured against her skin. Emma guided his hands, his lips, wordlessly showing him how her desires had evolved. Alex followed her lead, letting her set the pace, the intensity. This wasn't the frantic passion of their early days, but something deeper, more deliberate. Each touch an apology, each kiss a promise. When they finally came together, the connection transcended the physical. Emma's eyes held his, refusing to let him look away, demanding the intimacy they'd both been avoiding for too long. Afterward, they lay tangled in sheets and rose petals, Emma's head on his chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns along her spine. The string lights twinkled above them, like the stars visible through the cabin's unfinished roof. "That was—" Emma began, then faltered. "Different," Alex supplied. She nodded against his chest. "Better, I think, more honest." "We're not the same people we were 3 years ago," Alex observed. "Or even yesterday." Emma propped herself up to look at him. "Is that a good thing?" "I think so." Alex tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "The people we were 3 years ago were headed for divorce. The people we are tonight are at least talking about Paris instead of signing papers." Emma's expression grew thoughtful. "That's the problem, though, isn't it? Who will we be tomorrow, next week, next year? How do I know this version of you, the one who listens, who validates my dreams, who sees me, will still be here when the sun comes up? It was the fundamental question, the one they'd been circling all night. Alex considered it carefully. You don't, he answered honestly. Just as I don't know if the Emma who opens herself to me, who shares her fears and dreams, will remain once we return to our routines. His fingers traced the curve of her shoulder, but maybe that's been our mistake all along, assuming we know each other so well that we stop paying attention. Stop looking for changes. Stop adapting together. Emma settled back against his chest, her hair spilling across his skin. So, what do? We challenge each other, Alex suggested, every day, to see each other clearly, to speak honestly, to choose each other consciously instead of running on autopilot. That sounds exhausting, Emma murmured, though he could hear the smile in her voice. More exhausting than divorce lawyers and moving to separate homes. More exhausting than pretending we don't still love each other. Emma's breath caught at the word neither had spoken all night. Is that what you think this is? Love? Alex tilted her chin up, meeting her gaze directly. I never stopped loving you, Emma, not for a single day. I just forgot how to show it in ways that mattered to you. Emma's eyes searched his, looking for deception or manipulation, and finding none. I want to believe you, she whispered. But one night can't erase years of disconnect. No, Alex agreed. But it can be the first night of whatever comes next. He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. I'm not asking you to tear up the divorce papers. I'm not even asking you to say no to Paris. I'm just asking for the chance to show you, day by day, that tonight wasn't a fluke or a desperate last stand. Emma didn't respond immediately. Instead, she rested her head over his heart again, her fingers idly tracing the contours of his chest. I have a condition, she said finally. Name it. Emma sat up, the sheet pooling around her waist, her expression suddenly serious. Complete honesty, from both of us. No more secrets, no more assumptions, no more silent treatments or separate lives under the same roof. Agreed, Alex said without hesitation. I'm not finished, Emma continued. If we're doing this, really doing this, I need you to understand that Paris isn't a whim or a reaction to our marriage failing. It's a genuine opportunity I've worked my entire career to earn. Alex nodded. I understand. And Richard, Emma hesitated. He will be my colleague if I take this position, possibly my mentor, definitely part of my professional life. The old jealousy flared, but Alex pushed it down. I trust you, Emma. I don't need to trust him. She studied him for a moment, then nodded, apparently satisfied with what she saw in his expression. One more thing, she said, her tone softening. The most important thing. What's that? Emma leaned down, her lips a breath away from his. If you ever stop bringing me Sunday coffee in bed again, the divorce is back on. No discussion, no second chances. Alex laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. That, Mrs. Harrington, is a condition I will happily accept. As Emma's lips met his again, sealing their new agreement, Alex knew they were a long way from solving everything. Paris loomed as a decision point. The divorce papers still existed. Years of habits wouldn't change overnight. But for the first time in longer than he could remember, he felt hope, real, substantial hope, that they might find their way back to each other. Not as the naive young couple who'd buried that time capsule, but as the people they'd become, scarred, wiser, and finally ready to see each other clearly. Chapter 8. The secret room. Dawn approached, pale light seeping through the curtains. Emma dozed beside Alex, her breathing deep and even. He watched her sleep, memorizing the softness that relaxation brought to her features. Her auburn hair spilled across the pillow, one hand tucked beneath her cheek, lips slightly parted. In sleep, she looked exactly as she had 10 years ago when he'd first watched her this way. 3 hours until sunrise, 3 hours until their agreement expired. Alex slipped carefully from the bed, not wanting to wake her yet. He dressed quietly in the dim light, then made his way to the kitchen. Coffee began to brew as he gathered his thoughts, the familiar ritual grounding him in the uncertainty of this pivotal morning. Their night together had reopened wounds and possibilities in equal measure. Hours of honesty, vulnerability, physical reconnection. It was more than he'd dared hope for when she'd slid those divorce papers across the restaurant table. But he knew Emma well enough to understand that morning clarity might bring back her doubts, her practical considerations about their future. He needed to show her one more thing, the final piece of himself he'd kept hidden. Coffee in hand, Alex returned to the bedroom. Emma stirred as the mattress dipped beneath his weight, her eyes fluttering open. For a brief moment, confusion clouded her features, then recognition and remembrance. The night's revelations washed over her face in succession. Vulnerability, wariness, and finally, a cautious warmth. "Is it morning already?" she murmured, voice husky with sleep. "Almost." Alex offered the mug. "But we still have time." Emma sat up, the sheet pooling around her waist as she accepted the coffee with a grateful smile. She took a sip, closing her eyes briefly in appreciation. "You still remember exactly how I take it," she observed, "even after all this time." 2 sugars, splash of cream, heated precisely to the point where you can drink it immediately without burning your tongue, Alex recited. "Some things you don't forget." Emma's smile turned wistful. Unlike anniversary dates, parent-teacher conferences, and dinner reservations, the gentle jab contained no real malice, but Alex winced nonetheless. "I deserve that." "No," Emma sighed, setting the mug on the nightstand. "That wasn't fair. I'm trying not to score points anymore." She ran fingers through her tousled hair, gathering herself. The intimacy of the gesture, so ordinary, so domestic, made Alex's chest ache with longing for the 1,000 mornings he'd squandered. "Time for what?" she asked, referring to his earlier comment. "There's something I need to show you. Something important." Curiosity piqued. Emma dressed quickly in yoga pants and a soft sweater. Alex led her through their apartment, past the kitchen where they'd once cooked elaborate Sunday brunches, beyond the living room where they'd hosted parties that devolved into the two of them dancing after guests departed, to his home office, a space she rarely entered anymore. He paused at the bookshelf that covered one wall, feeling Emma's questioning gaze on his back. The mahogany shelves housed first editions, law references, and architectural volumes, a curated collection they'd built together in earlier years. "Remember when we renovated 4 years ago?" Alex asked, fingers trailing along leather spines. Emma nodded, leaning against the doorframe. "You insisted on designing this room yourself, wouldn't even let me see the plans." "I told you it was because I wanted to surprise you with the built-ins," Alex said, turning to face her. "But that wasn't the only reason." Emma's brow furrowed. "Alex, what's going on?" Instead of answering, he reached for a particular book, a first-edition Hemingway they'd found at a tiny bookstore along the Seine during their honeymoon. The leather binding was worn from handling, the pages softened by time. Emma's breath caught as recognition dawned. "You kept it," she whispered. "I thought you donated all the first editions when you redesigned." "I kept everything that mattered," Alex replied, pulling the book partially from the shelf. Rather than removing it completely, he applied gentle pressure to the spine. A soft click echoed in the quiet room, followed by a mechanical whisper as the entire bookshelf swung outward like a door, revealing a hidden room beyond. Emma's hand flew to her mouth, eyes widening in disbelief. "Alex, what?" "Come see," he said softly. taking her hand. The small room beyond had been constructed with a single purpose. Every wall was covered with memories, photos, ticket stubs, handwritten notes and mementos spanning their entire relationship. Track lighting illuminated the space softly, highlighting a meticulously organized timeline of their love, meticulously preserved. Emma stepped inside, breathless. "You built a secret room. For us." "For our story," Alex corrected, watching her reaction carefully. "Every important moment, everything I never wanted to forget." Emma moved slowly around the room, touching items reverently. The walls were arranged chronologically, their beginning on the left, proceeding clockwise around the room to their present. "This is from our third date," she marveled, fingers brushing over concert tickets framed behind glass. "That awful indie band at the Hollow, where you insisted the lead singer was tone-deaf, but the drummer had potential," Alex remembered. "You were the only person in the venue who actually understood music theory." Emma laughed softly. "I was insufferable. You were magnificent." She continued her exploration, finding treasures she'd forgotten existed. The champagne cork from their engagement night, preserved in a small glass dome. The napkin where she'd sketched their cabin design, now carefully framed. Hospital bracelets from when he'd broken his leg skiing and she'd stayed by his bedside for 3 days straight. "You kept my crossword puzzles?" she asked incredulously, finding a framed newspaper page where she'd completed the Sunday New York Times in pen without a single error. "You were so proud of yourself," Alex explained. "You did a victory dance around the breakfast table." "I'm surprised you noticed," Emma said, though without bitterness. "That was during your judicial clerkship year. You were buried in case files." "I noticed everything about you then," Alex admitted. "I just stopped saying it aloud." Emma nodded absently, already drawn to another display. Their wedding vows, handwritten on stationery now yellowed with age, framed alongside dried flowers from a bouquet. "I don't even remember what I promised you," she confessed softly. "Isn't that terrible? The most important promises of my life, and I can't recall the exact words." "You promised to challenge me," Alex said, moving to stand beside her. "To never let me become complacent or ordinary. To remind me that comfort isn't the same as happiness." Emma turned to him, surprised. "You remember?" "I remember everything you promised," he said simply, "because I failed to live up to all of it." She studied him for a moment, then turned back to continue her circuit of the room. What she found next stopped her cold, a wall section dedicated to the years of their estrangement. Photos from law firm events she'd attended alone, thinking he hadn't cared. Newspaper clippings about her biggest cases. A printed email from her mother thanking Alex for birthday flowers Emma hadn't known he'd sent. "You've been adding to this all along," she whispered, "even during the worst of it." Alex stood in the doorway, suddenly vulnerable. "I never stopped collecting our moments, Emma, even when I stopped sharing them with you." Her fingers traced a photo from just 6 months ago, Emma arguing a case in court, captured by the legal press. Her expression fierce, passionate, commanding. The pride in his preservation of it was unmistakable. "How could you create this beautiful tribute while simultaneously pushing me away?" Her voice held wonder rather than accusation. "Because I'm an idiot," Alex said simply. "Because I thought providing for our future was more important than living in our present. Because I convinced myself that loving you privately was enough." He gestured to the most recent section, photos from the past year, including ones she didn't recognize of herself. Emma at a cafe, laughing with a colleague. Emma asleep on the sofa with a brief still in her hands. Emma standing on their balcony, looking out at the city lights. "You've been photographing me without my knowledge?" she asked, unsure whether to be touched or disturbed. "Only in moments when I was struck by how much I still loved you," Alex explained. "Only when I was too cowardly to tell you directly." Emma continued examining the most recent artifacts, finding a small velvet box. She opened it carefully to discover her original engagement ring, the modest diamond she'd worn before Alex had upgraded it for their 5th anniversary. "You kept this?" She removed it from the box, turning it in the light. "I thought you'd returned it." "I couldn't," Alex admitted. "It represented a promise I hadn't fulfilled yet. The ring you wear now, it was part of my misguided effort to give you the life I thought you deserved. But this one," he nodded toward the original ring, "this one represents the promise I made when all we had were student loans and dreams." Emma slipped it onto her right hand, where it sat alongside its more elaborate successor on her left. The contrast was striking. One a symbol of material success, the other a reminder of simpler, but perhaps more authentic connection. "There's more," Alex said, directing her attention to a small table in the center of the room. Atop it sat a leather-bound journal. "I started writing to you when words failed me, when I couldn't bridge the gap between us." Emma approached the journal cautiously, as if it might contain secrets too painful to bear. "May I?" Alex nodded, heart hammering as she opened to a random page. His handwriting filled the pages, not neat daily entries, but sporadic emotional outpourings dated across the past 3 years. October 14th, 2021. "You won the Fairchild case today. I watched the press conference online. You were brilliant, Emma, fierce and articulate and unstoppable. I should have been there. I should have told you how proud I am. Instead, I sent flowers with a generic card. When did I become such a coward? When did I start believing that providing for you was the same as partnering with you?" Emma turned pages, finding another entry from more recent months. February 8th, 2022. "You fell asleep on the sofa tonight. I covered you with a blanket. You stirred but didn't wake. For a moment, your hand caught mine, and you smiled in your sleep. I wonder who you were dreaming about. I wonder if there's room for me in your dreams anymore. Santiago sent the revised cabin plans today. I'm building a home for a family that may never exist." Tears gathered in Emma's eyes as she continued reading, finding an entry from just weeks ago. April 30th, 2022. "I found a divorce attorney's business card in your purse when I was looking for the car keys. You've been meeting with lawyers, planning your exit. I should feel angry, betrayed. Instead, I feel terrified and strangely relieved that the pretense might finally end. Maybe once we stop pretending to be happy, we can remember how it felt to actually be happy. Or maybe it's too late for that now." Emma closed the journal gently, overwhelmed by the raw honesty of his private thoughts. "You knew I was considering divorce," she said quietly. "Before tonight." Alex nodded. "I suspected, but I didn't know how far along the process was until you handed me those papers." Emma turned to face him fully, eyes shining with unshed tears. "Ask me not to go," she whispered. Alex shook his head. "I won't. That's not why I showed you this." "Then why?" "To tell you that whether you choose Paris or divorce or a second chance here, this room will keep growing. I'll keep adding memories, from visits if you're in Paris, from co-parenting if we divorce, from our next chapter if you stay." His honesty stripped him bare. "I'm not keeping evidence of our past to guilt you about our future, Emma. I'm showing you that no matter what path you choose, your story will always be the most important one in my life." Emma moved to the final wall, the one facing the door. Unlike the others, it stood empty, bare hooks and frames waiting to be filled. "This space," she said softly, touching the blank wall. "For whatever comes next," Alex explained. "I left it empty because I didn't want to presume, because our future should be written together, not just by me in secret." As dawn's light strengthened outside the window, Emma pressed her forehead to his. "I still haven't decided about Paris," she admitted. Or about us. I know. Alex's arms circled her waist. That wasn't our agreement. You promised me until sunrise to convince you we had something worth saving. I've done my best. The rest is up to you. Emma's gaze traveled over the room once more, lingering on the evidence of a love that had never truly died, only gotten buried under years of neglect. Her fingers traced the original engagement ring, now sitting alongside its more ostentatious successor. "Does this room have a name?" she asked suddenly. The question caught Alex off guard. "I never thought to name it." Emma nodded thoughtfully, turning to face the empty wall again. "We should call it the History Room, because that's what this represents, our past. Beautiful, flawed, worth preserving, but ultimately behind us." Alex's heart sank. Had he miscalculated? Had showing her this room only reinforced her decision to leave? But then Emma turned back to him, taking both his hands in hers. "And that empty wall, that's what I'm interested in now. Not what we were, but what we might become. Not the story we failed to maintain, but the one we might write together if we're brave enough." She glanced at her watch. "Sunrise isn't for another hour, and I think I need that hour to tell you something I've been afraid to admit, even to myself." Chapter 9. The Truth. They sat facing each other in the secret room, surrounded by the artifacts of their love. Alex brought in cushions from the living room sofa, creating a makeshift nest on the floor. The intimacy of the space, this hidden shrine to their relationship, created a confessional atmosphere that made even silence feel significant. Emma's hands trembled slightly as she gathered her courage. The original engagement ring on her right hand caught the light differently than its successor, less brilliant perhaps, but somehow warmer. "When I first got my diagnosis," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I was devastated, not because I'd always dreamed of motherhood, but because suddenly choice became destiny. What might have been became what could never be." Alex listened, giving her the space her confession required. The doctor was clinical about it, efficient, advanced maternal age, and diminished ovarian reserve, delivered with the same tone he might use to discuss cholesterol levels. Emma's laugh held no humor. I sat there nodding, as if we were discussing someone else's body, someone else's future. She twisted the original engagement ring on her finger. "I kept thinking about that night in Napa, our second anniversary. We stayed at that ridiculous vineyard villa, drinking wine on the terrace. You said, 'Someday our kids will think we're so boring,' and I laughed and said, 'Someday is still far away.'" Alex remembered the moment with perfect clarity. Emma backlit by sunset, hair gleaming copper, her smile confident as she postponed parenthood for careers they both prioritized. The memory carried no bitterness now, only the poignancy of paths not taken. "Suddenly someday wasn't just far away," Emma continued. "It was potentially never. And the strangest part? I wasn't sure how I felt about that." She met his gaze directly. "I've never had that maternal instinct some women describe, that deep biological yearning for a child. I always thought I'd have children because that's what successful couples do, because you'd be an amazing father, because I didn't want to regret not trying." "You've never told me that before," Alex said softly. "How could I?" Emma's voice cracked slightly. "When society expects women to want motherhood instinctively. When your mother has been not so subtly mentioning grandchildren since our wedding day." She drew a steadying breath. "But that diagnosis forced me to confront the question, did I actually want children, or did I simply assume they'd be part of our future someday?" Alex reached for her hand, encouraging her to continue. "I didn't tell you because I was afraid," Emma admitted. "Afraid you'd stay out of duty. Afraid you'd leave once you realized I couldn't give you children. Afraid of your pity. But mostly," her voice dropped to a whisper, "afraid that I'd already lost you anyway." The rawness of her admission hung in the air between them. "The partnership in Paris became my escape plan," she continued after a moment. "If I couldn't have the family we once talked about, I'd have the career I'd always wanted. I'd reinvent myself somewhere new, somewhere the absence of you wouldn't echo in every room." "Emma," Alex started, but she shook her head. "Please, let me finish." She took a deep breath. "After the diagnosis, I started watching you differently, looking for signs that you were as dissatisfied with our marriage as I feared. And you know what? I found them everywhere." She gestured toward the secret room's walls. The late nights at the office, the separate bedrooms, the polite distance we maintained. I interpreted everything as confirmation that you were just waiting for the right moment to leave. "So, you decided to leave first," Alex said quietly. Emma nodded. "Classic preemptive strike. If I controlled the ending, maybe it wouldn't destroy me completely." She pulled her hand from his, needing physical distance to maintain her emotional clarity. "Last week, I met with Richard to discuss final details of the partnership. He took me to dinner at this beautiful restaurant overlooking the Seine. Everything was perfect. The opportunity, the setting, the future he painted for me." Alex's jaw tightened at the mention of Richard, but he remained silent. "And all I could think about was you," Emma confessed, a tear slipping down her cheek. "How you would love the restaurant's architecture, how you'd charm the sommelier into telling stories about the wine, how empty that perfect future would be without you in it." She wiped away the tear with the back of her hand. "That night, I decided to give us one last chance. Not because I expected miracles, but because I needed to know I'd tried everything before walking away." Dawn light filtered through the small window, casting a golden glow across her face. "The divorce papers were real, Alex. The deadline was real. But what I never told you, what I barely admitted to myself, is that I've been praying you'd give me a reason to stay." Alex reached for her hand again, his own vision blurring. "Why Paris, then? Why not just ask me directly for what you needed?" "Because I needed to know you'd choose me," Emma said simply. "Not just the convenient version of me who fit your life here, but all of me, my ambitions, my dreams, the career I've worked so hard to build." She squeezed his hand. "When you said you'd move to Paris with me, that's when I first believed tonight might actually change something. That's when I started to hope." "And your diagnosis?" Alex asked gently. "How does that fit into whatever comes next for us?" Emma looked away, staring at the chronological display of their relationship, from carefree beginnings to complicated present. "I've spent 6 months thinking of it as an ending," she said finally. "The end of possibilities, the end of choices. But sitting here, surrounded by all these moments we've shared." She gestured to the room. "Maybe it's just another turn in our story, not an ending, but a redirection." She met his eyes, vulnerability etched in every line of her face. "But I need to know where you stand. Not what you think I want to hear, but your honest truth. Do you want children, Alex? Has that always been part of your vision for us?" The question hung between them, weighted with significance. Alex considered it carefully, knowing this was no moment for placation or easy answers. "I want you," he said finally. "Children have always been a maybe someday for me, not a requirement for happiness." He shifted closer, taking both her hands in his. "When we were younger, I assumed we'd have kids eventually because that's what people do. But as years passed, I realized I was perfectly content building a life with just you." Emma searched his face for any hint of deception or sacrifice. "You're not just saying that?" "I've done enough damage by not being honest with you," Alex replied. "I won't add to it now." He gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. If you want to pursue fertility treatments, I'll be beside you every step. If you want to explore adoption or surrogacy, I'm all in. If you decide you want just us, I'll consider myself the luckiest man alive to have a lifetime with you alone. His voice broke slightly. The only future I can't accept is one without you in it. Emma's tears fell freely now. How can you be so certain when I'm still so confused? Because tonight reminded me what clarity feels like, Alex said simply. After years of fog, I can finally see what matters. Dawn's golden light strengthened, casting long shadows across the memory-filled walls. Outside the small window, the sky had begun its transformation, from indigo to azure. There's something else I haven't told you, Emma said after a moment, about Richard and Paris. Alex tensed involuntarily, bracing for another revelation. Richard doesn't just want a legal partner, Emma continued quietly. The position is legitimate. The firm needs someone with my expertise in international arbitration. But Richard made it clear he's hoping for more. She met Alex's gaze steadily. He didn't explicitly proposition me. He's too smart for that. But there were comments about how well we worked together in law school, how he's never found that same connection with anyone since, how Paris is the most romantic city in the world. Alex's expression darkened. I knew it. Don't, Emma warned. Don't make this about your rivalry with Richard. This is about whether you trust me. I trust you completely, Alex said without hesitation. It's him I don't trust. And that's where we keep failing, Emma replied, frustration edging into her voice. You focus on Richard's intentions rather than recognizing that regardless of what he wants, I make my own choices. She stood, needing to move, to create physical space for her thoughts. I told Richard I was married. He said, and I quote, for now, as if my marriage were a temporary inconvenience rather than the central relationship of my life. Alex stood as well, keeping his distance but watching her intently. What did you say to that? Nothing, Emma admitted. I changed the subject. And that's when I realized I was using him as an escape route, not just professionally but personally. That I was considering running from our problems instead of facing them. She turned to face him fully. That night, I decided on the ultimatum. If you showed me even a glimmer of the man I married, the one who saw me completely and loved me anyway, I'd find the courage to try again. Alex took a small step toward her. And did I? Show you that man? Emma's expression softened. You showed me something better. You showed me a man who's learned from his mistakes, who's grown, who sees me more clearly now than he did then. Is that enough? Alex asked, the question containing all his hopes and fears. Instead of answering directly, Emma moved to the empty wall, the blank space reserved for their future. She pressed her palm flat against it, as if testing its solidity. When I was 15, she said quietly, my creative writing teacher gave us an assignment to write our future obituaries. Morbid, right? But she said, write the life you want to be remembered for. She turned back to Alex. I wrote that I died at 97 after arguing a case before the International Court of Justice well into my 80s, that I was survived by my husband of 70 years, who still claimed I was the most brilliant woman he'd ever met. A smile touched her lips. Even then, even before I knew you existed, my imagined perfect life included a partner who admired my mind as much as anything else about me. I've always admired your brilliance, Alex said softly, even when I failed to show it. Emma nodded. I know that now. She moved back to him, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her green eyes. Paris isn't about running away anymore, she said. It's about running towards something. A career opportunity that excites me, a new chapter for us, a chance to rebuild without the weight of old patterns and assumptions. Hope bloomed in Alex's chest, tentative but growing. Does that mean... It means I'm not signing those divorce papers, Emma whispered, and it means I need to know if your offer still stands to build a life together in Paris. Alex brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. When you handed me those divorce papers, I thought my world was ending. Now I realize it was actually beginning again. Emma shifted closer. I still don't know what happens next. Paris is still a remarkable opportunity. Our problems won't disappear with one night of honesty. No, Alex agreed, but at least we're facing them together now. Outside, the first direct rays of sunlight broke over the horizon, bathing the room in warm light. Their deadline had arrived. Sunrise, Emma whispered, glancing toward the window. Alex's heart constricted. So it is. Emma stood, pulling him to his feet. For a terrible moment, Alex thought she was walking away, that their night together had been beautiful but insufficient. Instead, she led him to the empty wall. She touched an empty space, fingers tracing possibilities only she could see. This is where you'll put the photo of us in Paris, she said softly. Not of me alone, but of us. Together, finding our way in a new city, building a future neither of us could have imagined. Alex stared at her, hardly daring to hope. Does that mean... Emma turned to face him fully, vulnerability and determination mingling in her expression. It means I'm choosing us, she said. Not despite the difficulties, but because of how we face them together. It means I'm not running from problems, but moving toward possibilities. She placed her palm against his cheek. And it means you need to start practicing your French. Alex covered her hand with his. There's a phrase I already know by heart. Let me guess, Emma smiled. Where is the nearest Starbucks? Je t'aime, he whispered instead. I've never stopped loving you, Emma. Not for a single day. Even when we were at our worst, she asked, needing certainty. Especially then, Alex admitted, when we were failing each other most completely, I loved you with a desperation that terrified me. The sunrise painted her in golden light as Alex gathered her into his arms. Through the small window, they could see the city awakening, traffic increasing, lights winking out as night surrendered to day. So we're really doing this? Emma asked, a hint of wonder in her voice. Starting over in Paris. You're willing to leave everything here behind. Not everything, Alex corrected, nodding toward the memory-filled walls. We're taking the best parts with us. He gestured toward the journal on the table. And I'd like to keep writing if that's okay, not in secret anymore, but as a record of our journey. Emma smiled, resting her head against his chest. On one condition. Name it. We write it together from now on, she said. Your perspective and mine. The complete story, not just half of it. As the morning light strengthened, casting their shadows onto the blank wall reserved for future memories, Alex held Emma close, his heart overflowing with gratitude for second chances and truths finally spoken. Je t'aime, he whispered again against her hair, always. Je t'aime aussi, Emma responded, the unfamiliar French soft on her tongue, a first step toward their shared future. For all that was, and all that will be. Chapter 10. The promised morning light flooded their apartment as Alex prepared breakfast, moving with renewed energy. Emma sat at the kitchen island, divorce papers spread before her, a pen in hand. Are you sure about this? She asked, meeting his gaze across the counter. Alex set a plate of fresh berries and croissants before her. About Paris? Yes. About us? Absolutely. Emma tapped the pen against the papers. What about your firm? The cabin? Everything you've built here? Details, Alex replied, joining her with coffee. important details, but still just details. He reached for the divorce papers, studying them thoughtfully. Then, with deliberate movements, he turned to the last page. Instead of tearing them up in some dramatic gesture, he signed his name with a steady hand. Emma's breath caught. "What are you doing?" "Being honest," Alex said, sliding the papers back to her. "You were right to have these drawn up. You were right to question our marriage. And now, I want you to be right about giving us another chance." He took her hands in his. "But I want to do this correctly, not with vague promises in the heat of reconciliation." Reaching into his pocket, he withdrew a small sealed envelope. "Our marriage began with promises we couldn't keep. Let it begin again with promises we can." Emma opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a handwritten contract, simple yet profound. "I, Alexander James Harrington, promise the following to Emma Claire Harrington. 1. To see you, truly see you, every day we are together, and to seek connection every day we are apart. 2. To respect your career as equal to my own, and to celebrate your ambitions as fervently as my own achievements. 3. To speak difficult truths rather than comfortable lies, and to listen with the intent to understand rather than to respond. 4. To bring you coffee in bed every Sunday, no matter what city or country we call home. 5. To never again mistake providing a life with building a life together, signed with love, respect, and the full knowledge that actions must follow these words for them to hold meaning." At the bottom was his signature and a blank line awaiting hers. "What is this?" Emma asked, voice thick with emotion. "A promise I intend to keep," Alex replied. "One I'd like to make legally binding." Emma's brow furrowed in confusion. "I signed the divorce papers," Alex explained, "to acknowledge that our first marriage contract failed, and I've drafted this new contract to begin whatever comes next." He took a deep breath. "If you choose to sign the divorce papers, I accept that decision, but I'm asking you to consider signing this too, not as a continuation of our past, but as the foundation for our future." Emma studied both documents, weighing endings against beginnings. "You'd start over?" she asked. "Completely? With you?" In a heartbeat. Alex's certainty was absolute. "We can file the divorce papers if that's what you need for closure. Just promise me we won't stop with an ending." He lifted her chin gently. "Marry me again, Emma, in Paris with the Eiffel Tower as our witness, or at the cabin when it's finished, or at City Hall on Monday. I don't care where or how. I just want the chance to do better this time." Emma's eyes searched his, finding nothing but sincerity. Then, with deliberate movements, she reached for his pen. But instead of signing either document, she turned his contract over and began to write. Alex watched in silence as she drafted her own promises. "I, Emma Claire Harrington, promise the following to Alexander James Harrington. 1. To share my fears before they become walls between us. 2. To remember that partnership means weathering storms together, not creating separate shelters. 3. To value presence over presence and connection over convenience. 4. To never again mistake independence for isolation. 5. To dance with you in our kitchen, regardless of who might hear our laughter." She signed her name with a flourish, then turned to the divorce papers. With steady hands, she wrote across the top, "No longer required," and added her signature beside his. "So," Alex said softly. "Paris." "Paris," Emma confirmed. "Together." He pulled her into his arms, sealing their new agreement with a kiss that tasted of promise and possibility. "Though I have conditions," Emma murmured against his lips. "Name them." "First, you need to call Santiago about adapting the cabin plans. I want a proper home to return to someday." Alex nodded. "Consider it done." "Second, We're going to need your secret room reconstructed in our Paris apartment, with space for new memories." "Absolutely," he agreed. Emma's expression turned serious. "And third, most importantly, we need to find the best fertility specialist in Paris. Just because our chances are slim doesn't mean they're non-existent." Alex's heart swelled. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I want options," Emma clarified. "I'm saying I refuse to let fear of what might never be prevent us from exploring what could be." Her fingers laced with his. "And I'm saying that whether it's just the two of us, or whether we find other ways to create family, I want that journey to be with you." As morning light bathed their kitchen in gold, Alex pulled Emma to her feet. Without music, without prompting, he began to dance with her, swaying gently to the rhythm of second chances and promises made not in the passion of night, but in the clear, honest light of day. Chapter 11. The Letter. 3 weeks later, Emma stood in their half-packed apartment, surrounded by cardboard boxes and bubble wrap. Paris awaited. She'd officially accepted the partnership, and Alex had secured a visiting professor position at a prestigious French university. Their life together was transforming with dizzying speed. "Have you seen my passport?" Emma called, rifling through desk drawers. She was flying ahead tomorrow for an initial week of meetings while Alex finalized their affairs in the States. "Check the safe," Alex suggested from the kitchen, where he was cataloging items for storage. Emma opened the small wall safe, finding her passport alongside their important documents. As she retrieved it, she noticed an unfamiliar envelope with her name in Alex's handwriting. "What's this?" she asked, returning to the kitchen with both passport and envelope. Alex glanced up, his expression softening. "The first of many. Open it when you're on the plane." Emma raised an eyebrow. "Mysterious." "Intentional," he corrected with a smile. "Some things are best read in transit, in the space between where you've been and where you're going." The next day, settled in first class with Paris 6 hours ahead, Emma remembered the envelope. She opened it carefully, finding several pages of Alex's distinctive handwriting. "My dearest Emma, by the time you read this, you'll be somewhere over the Atlantic, halfway between our past and our future. While your body travels to Paris, I want your heart to journey through our story, not as it appeared from the outside, but as I experienced it from within. This is the first of 12 letters I've hidden for you to find throughout our first year in Paris. One for each month, each revealing a moment when I fell more deeply in love with you, even during the years when I couldn't properly show it. Today's letter brings you back to the beginning. Not our first meeting, not our first date, but the first time I knew with absolute certainty that you were the one my soul recognized as home. It was 3 months into dating. You'd just lost that pro bono case for the immigrant family facing deportation. You were devastated, convinced you'd failed them. I found you in your office at midnight, surrounded by legal books, still searching for options that didn't exist. You looked up when I entered, your eyes red-rimmed but fierce. "I'm not giving up," you said, though your voice was hoarse from arguing in court all day. In that moment, watching you fight for strangers with every ounce of your brilliance and passion, I knew I would spend my life loving you. Your determination, your heart, your refusal to surrender what matters. I brought you coffee and sat beside you. Together we found a different approach, a humanitarian appeal that eventually succeeded. But even if we hadn't, even if you'd lost completely, my heart was already decided. That night, I didn't just fall in love with your strength. I fell in love with your vulnerability, with how deeply you care, with your willingness to break your own heart for what you believe is right. I see that same courage in you now as you fly toward a new chapter. Know that while our bodies may be separated by an ocean this week, my admiration travels with you, as constant as the stars guiding sailors home. Next month, look for a blue envelope in the left pocket of my wool coat, the one you always steal when Paris evenings grow chilly. Until then, Remember that new beginnings are simply the continuation of a love story already in progress. Forever yours, Alex. P.S. Richard Lawson may be a brilliant attorney, but his French accent is atrocious. Feel free to tell him your husband said so. Emma laughed through her tears, the letter clutched to her chest, as the plane carried her toward their future. Outside her window, sunrise painted the clouds in shades of promise. She reached for her phone, typing quickly before the flight attendant could remind her to switch to airplane mode. Found your letter. Now I need to find a way to love you more completely than I already do. Impossible task, but I'll spend a lifetime trying. See you in a week, Professor Harrington. Your Parisian apartment will be waiting. As the plane ascended above the clouds, Emma tucked the letter safely away, already looking forward to discovering the next one. Their story wasn't perfect, might never be perfect, but it was theirs, written in honest words and second chances, and for the first time in years, she couldn't wait to turn the page. Chapter 12. The Return. 3 months later, rain pounded against the windows of their Parisian apartment overlooking the Seine. Emma stood watching lightning illuminate the city, her silhouette framed against the dramatic backdrop. 3 months of rediscovery, 3 months of rebuilding, 3 months of Paris teaching them both how to see their relationship with fresh eyes. The apartment door opened, followed by the familiar sound of Alex shaking rain from his umbrella. "I'm home," he called, voice carrying over the storm. Home. Such a simple word for such a profound concept. Their apartment had quickly become exactly that, a sanctuary they'd created together, blending his books with her art, filling new spaces with shared memories. "In here," Emma replied, not turning from the window. Alex appeared behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and pressing a kiss to her neck. "You're brooding again." "Contemplating," she corrected, leaning back against him. "There's a difference. Whatever you call it, you've got that look, the one that means you're thinking too hard." Emma smiled despite herself. This was the miracle of their new beginning, how quickly they'd relearned each other's signals, how easily they communicated what would have festered in silence before. "I received an email from the specialist," she said quietly. "The one we've been waiting to see." Alex stilled, his breath warm against her hair. "And she can see us next week, Tuesday morning." His arms tightened around her waist. "That's good news, isn't it?" "It is," Emma agreed. "It's just scary," Alex finished for her, "because hope is always scarier than resignation." Emma turned in his arms, facing him fully. "How do you do that? Know exactly what I'm feeling." "Because I'm feeling it too." Alex brushed a strand of hair from her face. "Because I'm finally paying attention." Another flash of lightning illuminated the worry in Emma's eyes. "What if we go through all of this and still can't have children?" she whispered. "What if medicine confirms what we already suspect?" Alex considered her question carefully, knowing his answer mattered. "Then we adapt. We explore other options, or we build a life that's magnificent without children. Either way, we face it together." He cradled her face in his hands. "The only wrong path is one where we let fear make our decisions for us. We've already done that for too many years." Emma nodded, drawing strength from his certainty. "I need to show you something." She led him to their bedroom, opening her nightstand drawer to remove a small plastic stick. The twin pink lines in the result window were unmistakable. Alex stared, speechless. "I took it this morning," Emma explained, voice trembling. "I'm still in shock." "But the doctor said that my chances were significantly reduced," Emma finished. "Not impossible." Alex sank onto the edge of the bed, the test still clutched in his hand. "How? When?" "How is the usual way," Emma said with a small laugh. "As for when, remember that weekend we went to Bordeaux? The Vineyard Hotel with the absurdly large bathtub? A smile spread across Alex's face as the memory resurfaced. The night we finished that ridiculous bottle of Chateau Margaux. That would be my guess. Emma sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder. I'm terrified, Alex. The doctors said if I did manage to conceive, the risks would be higher. This is so early, so fragile. That's why we're seeing the specialist, Alex said, finding his voice again, to do everything possible to protect you both. He placed a hand gently against her still flat stomach. Have you known long? Just since this morning. I've been walking around in a daze all day. Why didn't you call me? Emma smiled. Because some news deserves to be delivered in person. Because I needed to process it myself first. She covered his hand with hers. And because I wanted to see your face exactly as it is right now. Alex pulled her close, overwhelmed by joy tinged with fear. We're not telling anyone until we're past the first trimester. Agreed, Emma nodded. This stays between us for now. Thunder rolled over the city as they held each other, the storm outside mirroring the tumult of emotions within. Excitement, terror, hope, disbelief. I want to go home, Emma said suddenly. Alex pulled back to look at her. You mean to the States? She nodded. Not permanently, just for a weekend. I want to see the cabin. I want to stand in that unfinished space with you and imagine our child running across those floors someday. The construction team says the roof is finally complete, Alex told her. We could fly back next weekend if you'd like. Perfect. Emma stood, pulling him toward the window where Paris glittered in the rain. I love it here. I love the life we're building, but I need to connect what's happening now with the dreams we had then. Alex wrapped his arms around her from behind, both of them watching the storm together. Those old dreams haven't disappeared, Emma. They've just been waiting for us to find our way back to them. Later that night, as Alex slept beside her, Emma slipped from bed and moved to their balcony. The storm had passed, leaving behind a washed clean sky scattered with stars. Below, the Seine reflected city lights like scattered gold coins. Paris had given them the fresh start they needed, the distance from old patterns, the space to rebuild what had been broken. But their true home wasn't a place. It was the connection they'd nearly lost and fought to recover. Emma placed a hand protectively over her stomach, whispering promises to the miracle they hadn't dared hope for. As she did, her gaze caught on the blue envelope, partially hidden in Alex's coat pocket, the next letter in his year-long series. Smiling, she left it undisturbed. Some discoveries were best saved for tomorrow. Some stories unfolded most beautifully when given time to reveal themselves. She returned to bed, curling against Alex's warmth. He stirred, drawing her closer without fully waking. Love you, he murmured sleepily. Love you too, Emma whispered back, closing her eyes. Outside their window, Paris continued its eternal dance of light and shadow. Inside, the future they'd once thought impossible took its first fragile breaths, a testament to second chances, to difficult truths spoken in darkness, to love stubborn enough to survive its own undoing. One night had changed everything, and now they had a lifetime of nights to get it right. The end,